So let's start with that briefing by the Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga, which started at about 4 p.m. She says about 95% of schools have been ably provided with the COVID-19 related imperatives. In a press briefing which has just concluded, she says there will be no school that will resume if not ready to do so. Motshekga added that for the remaining 5% learners, alternative measures have been developed by different districts. These include using neighbouring schools, underutilized spaces in boarding schools, and putting other learners in cabs. To talk more about this and other issues of the briefing, we're joined by teachers' unions. For reaction, Naptosa's Executive Director Basil, Manuel, Equal Education's General Secretary is Noncedo, Madubedube, both on Skype. A very good evening to you both, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Now, let's start with the fundamentals. You put out a statement as the union saying that you agree with what's been said, that most of the schools are ready, and you also put out your non-negotiables. But are you largely happy that as tomorrow starts, learners go back to schools, that they are safe and well catered for?
Good evening. Well, yes, we cautiously welcomed it. And we said cautiously because there are issues that we are still worried about. But we've gotten to the point where choices are getting limited in terms of the return. But we are still worried that some schools still have gaps. And of course, tomorrow will play itself out, and we will really see whether the report that has been presented is as factual as we would like to believe it is. Remember that we did our own surveys and that we have found gaps too. We are particularly worried about the water supply to the last few schools, but are extremely pleased.
Mr. Manuel, let me stop you and ask you, where are those gaps? Because the last time we spoke, it was an average about 50 to 60% of school readiness. Now, for instance, government is saying 97.6% of public schools are ready. With your figures, does that tally?
There's broad correlation, but it is not exactly the same. We see the gaps in the Eastern Cape and the gaps in KZN. And Free State and Mpumalanga to a lesser degree, but they are there. And of course, we see that the delivery of the water tanks, etc., particularly in the Eastern Cape and in KZN, may still be lagging behind a little by about 300 schools. And those are the issues that we are worried about.
Let me hear from Ms. Madubedube. Equal education, do you largely agree with this? Because I think it is important to go down to the numbers, crunch those figures. It's something that was brought up over and over again during the press briefing. Mr. Manuel here saying broadly, largely, but for parents who are sitting at home, they need a little bit more definitive terms in whether or not you're satisfied that the figures that we've been presented as a country, as a public, that those tally with the information on the ground that you're getting.
Look, I was actually just about to say that the figures really mean nothing to parents and learners on the ground, right? What people want to know is that in the event that you go back to school tomorrow, if you've gone through your whole entire high school career without the security of water, will that water tank be there? People want to know that there are plans in place for learners who will phase back into school in July or in August. Our members have said to us, lockdown has been difficult. It's been difficult to learn. And to catch up with the teaching and learning and curriculum process. So, I mean, those are the big issues for us. And the reason I say numbers aren't important is because you'll still find, this morning I got a WhatsApp from a woman that is organizing in Limpopo that said, look, these schools have these kinds of issues in pertaining to the procurement of PPE, for example. But the MEC from Limpopo in the briefing just now had said, look, we're 100% ready to go. There's some issues here and there. And none of those things are comprehensive or detailed or subjective. So we can't have a sense.
Is it mostly rural and township schools that have been left behind, Ms. Madubedube? Because this is the sentiment that we're getting from some of the reports.
So from what we understand, from principal and learner surveys done in the first week for grade 12s in particular, we know that the provision of water and sanitation facilities across provinces, rural and urban, is a big challenge. In the urban provinces, and I'm sorry no one asked Debbie Schaefer this question, a lot of schools in Khayelitsha, for example, in Maitland, for example, which is Metro Central, had reported not having water. inside taps. So you've got the school facilities, but the bathrooms aren't places learners feel comfortable going to because they haven't worked conducively in a long time. And then you've got urban, rural provinces like the Eastern Cape. We organize in Limpopo, Gamashashane, for example. KZN, which is the second largest province with plain pit latrines as the only source of sanitation. Those provinces are deeply concerned about going back because they understand the messaging to be wash your hands, but they know that their schools don't have the apparatus for this.
All right, so Mr. Manuel, it goes beyond facilities. The mention of orientation, induction was also made. We know that in some schools, teachers haven't even gone back. So how do they go back to school tomorrow being the first day and none of that has been done, including orientation on the curriculum itself?
Well, we have an agreement that in those schools where teachers hadn't gone back, that orientation starts tomorrow and that by Wednesday, then teaching will kick off. That may not have come out clearly in the briefing, but that certainly was our understanding with the minister yesterday, because there are gaps and our teachers stayed out because these gaps hadn't been covered. Now, we are still not saying every gap is covered, but we are saying now the real monitoring starts because there are still issues. For us, the big issues are the sustaining of the COVID-19 compliance. It doesn't matter that you are ready for a day. You must be ready for the next 6 months. Are there going to be replenishment of the supplies? These are the questions that we've asked, and these are things that we are going to follow up on.
Ms. Madubedube, are you getting anything on a coherent learner and teacher wellness plan?
Yes, I mean, we heard that for the first time inside the briefing today, and it's also in the statement from the unions, and I think that's a good way to sort of frame it. But one of our demands at the moment is that the minister needs to give a detailed protocol for access to psychosocial support. The only thing we've heard about is that it's available, some organizations and civil society will assist, but we also know that in provinces like the Western Cape, for example, from a Safe Schools audit we'd done a couple of years ago, that the numbers of counselors available to learners or per school is shocking. The capacity inside the Department of Social Development to provide this kind of service is minimal. And so I think there should be a drastic push, and it should be part of the first part of the lessons run or the orientations run around the impacts of COVID. Someone had mentioned, I think, inside the briefing that it's important that learners first are asked about the impact that lockdown has had on them and how they've come to sort of catching up and staying in terms with what their school term and work has required from them. And there are also socioeconomic challenges that learners have faced. So we're really committed to driving and putting pressure on the Department of Basic Education, together with provincial education departments. We need a clear plan. We need numbers, we need processes so that learners know exactly where to go when they need that kind of support. So, the last one, before we go, is there has to be a full societal approach in putting pressure on the Department of Basic Education to provide school nutrition for all learners as schools open tomorrow. The minister in her first address had said to us that will happen. In her most recent address, it said, no, the school nutrition program will be open for grade 12s and 7s. This is a violation of the basic rights for children. As the country faces the kind of socioeconomic ills as a result of lockdown, the pandemic, hunger and food security is a major issue in our communities. We have to feed children. It's a priority, and I'm urging everyone, the unions included, to challenge the Minister of Basic Education on this one.
It's a good thing that you raised that because Mr. Manuel, I'd like to come to you on this. All plans need implementation, and that needs uniformity. On comorbidities, is there an indication of how the collective agreement on concessions will be followed?
Well, we have the collective agreement. Unfortunately, the collective agreement has one sentence that seems to be causing confusion, and that is about the status of the 60-plus grouping. The indication from health is that those over the age of 60 are also comorbid, so they must also be attended to. And what we want is a single interpretation and not the confused interpretation we're having now. Let me say something about the food quickly, is that Naptosa and certainly the teacher unions have broadly supported the idea. However, we were fearful of the large number of kids arriving back at one time without there being a plan. What we want is a coherent plan to see how off-site we could assist the children, because we are fully aware that the kids are going hungry out there at home. currently.
And the disparities exist also at public and private schools. Ms. Madubedube, let's talk about that. The minister seeming to be very clear that there are some concessions that have been made for private schools. How then do you, especially if you're looking at accessing quality education, this is one of the demands of the union, that there must be equality on this front. How are you going to do that, especially if some schools say we are ready to open all the grades, for instance? That means there's a responsibility brought to bear on so many other things, and not all children are moving in tandem.
Look, there's growing traction just in society more broadly that schools should not open until a later date. And that's because we've seen on social media platforms with our own networks that schools that are in quintile 4 and 5 have been operating. It's been business as usual in those schools because learners have access to the tools, the resources, the connectivity. And so we're already on the back foot here. And so what we really do need, and no one's talking to us comprehensively about this. What does the creaming of the curriculum look like? And what are the assessment sort of modality that are going to be used to ensure that as learners transition back, they all come in and have to learn the same material, expected to perform the same assessments, to take them to a common an equal place at the end of the school year, whatever that means. So we're under no guise or fast that we're walking into an equal education system. And so I think that's predominantly why Equal Education believes it's important for learners to go back to school. We need the structure, we need the resourcing. Our own learners and members have said to us, we need mediation. Learning without teachers has been difficult. The programs that are in place by the department, calling it some form of blended learning, the radio and the TV broadcasts haven't been effective because they aren't interactive. And I know that learners should have to think about adapting to the sort of circumstance of the moment. But when you're already marginalized and come from to the moment on a back foot, it's difficult to catch up. So I'm deeply worried about what the school year looks like. I'm worried about what the generation of learners now in schools are going to have to grapple with. And that's why we're really earnestly calling for the support, psychosocial support for learners in particular.
Mr. Manuel, what's your point of view on that, especially seeing the criticism is there is an overemphasis on assessment? We're dealing with new uncharted territory here.
Absolutely, and this is one of the cries of our teachers. The curriculum trimming that has happened virtually in the dark. Remember that the people didn't know how many school weeks we'd have left. They didn't have the calendar. They didn't know when we'd start. So it is woefully inadequate now. It has to be redone, and redone in a measure where it actually doesn't add to the psychological pressure and the stress that teachers are under already. And the children, mind you. Don't forget that the children are very stressed out, particularly the matrics. We as Naptosa have particularly said that in the primary school, we need to seize this opportunity as a gift and concentrate on the fault lines in education: reading, mathematics, and language. And the rest, our kids will catch up on. Let us not be so engrossed in wanting to teach what is scripted in the curriculum. We have done the curriculum. We are the people that have put it together. So we can determine what is important. And I'm telling you, if at the end of COVID-19, if we've taught every child to read, every child to do mathematics, we would have done much better than trying to recover the year that is lost at the moment.
A healthy and safe environment, that's another demand that the unions have made. Ms. Madubedube, has there been anything that's been put down as at least an alternative plan that works in replacing teachers that are on leave or where there are vacancies? We know that there are vast vacancies, and we also know that some teachers are at a point of retirement. Is there a workable plan, especially in those schools without these resources?
So our own surveys have focused on the infrastructure issues or concerns that our learners had brought forward to us in order for them to go back to school. So things like mobile classrooms, the sanitation facilities, water and soap. I don't have answers around the competencies of teachers and the capacity of teachers who may at some point be needing to run platooned sort of models in schools and working for longer than the required legal regulated time. So I think that's something the union should be focusing on. But I do want to say and flag that a lot of teachers that have been in contact with Equal Education feel that the full approach to reopening schools has been a very top-down approach, and there hasn't been adequate consultation. A lot of teachers have said to us, look, we have to jump through hoops to get medical notes from doctors to prove that we aren't able to come back to school. And there are genuine concerns around the protection of work for those teachers. Teachers, particularly in the Western Cape, in the hotspots and epicenters, are deeply concerned and feel they aren't consulted by the departments of basic education on the protocols or processes that take place after teachers been identified as a sort of positive for COVID. So those are the things I do know. The rest, I'd be interested to hear what Naptosa has to say.
It's a pity we have run out of time, but I must ask you both, in a word, yes or no, do you encourage parents to take their children back to school following the announcement that we had earlier on? I'll start with you, Mr. Manuel, yes or no?
Absolutely yes. Okay. School is the best place for children to be.
Ms. Madubedube?
Yes, and they need to help us monitor those schools. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much to you both. And yes. I do apologize. We have run out of time, but we do appreciate your input. Naptosa is Executive